He could have written it 100 years ago, he could have written it 1,000 years ago, he could have written it 1,000 years later, but the truths remain eternal. To that extent, Sri Aurobindo's writings, like Sanatan Dharma itself, are eternal.
Sri Aurobindo was not only a revolutionary in the political sense, he was also a revolutionary in the spiritual sense.
Hello, a very good evening. Very good evening. Welcome back to Swarajya Conversations. I'm really privileged to be joined by the editors of Reading Sri Aurobindo. This is a really good book that has come out very recently. And I'm joined by Gautam Chikermane and Devdip Ganguliji. Gautamji, Devdipji, thank you so much for joining me. I wish you a very good evening for starters.
Thank you,
Thank you
Sharan.
for having
It's
us.
a pleasure to be here. We've been reading about things in Swarajya. This is the first time that we are being seen on Swarajya, and I hope the interview goes well.
Thank you so much. I look forward to the interview as well. First of all, there's been many works written about Sri Aurobindo, and in fact, the man himself has written so many works. That sort of that is very timeless, so to speak. So, in that sense, what does this book in particular offer to the readers?
Should I take that, Devdeep, or would you like
Yeah,
to take
please
that?
go ahead. Go ahead, Gautam.
So, Sri Aurobindo has written about 6 million words or spoken to disciples, around 6 million words in total, which have been put together by the Ashram Archive Department into 36 volumes comprising 21,000 pages. That's a whole lot of work by any single person anywhere across the world if you compare just in terms of the vastness of the work. If you go into the depths of the work, then there is no equal to Sri Aurobindo. Now, having said that, I don't know who has written what about Sri Aurobindo, because during my research when we were doing this book, I searched a lot to see what other people have written, and I found it's very sketchy, it's incidental, it's either some news reports or some analytical opinion pieces. There has
Okay.
been no serious scholarship on Sri Aurobindo beyond a handful of papers. When the 150th birth anniversary of Sri Aurobindo was approaching, I thought that maybe I need to put a book together. And I thought I'll go through all the 36 volumes and encapsulate them, make it accessible, because there is no such. People keep asking me, which book of Sri Aurobindo should I read? Just as 20 years ago, I was asking
Yeah.
people, which book should I begin to read Sri Aurobindo with?
Right.
And there are no straight answers. And please indulge us when we say that it is the absolute truth. It's a lived experience, it's an experiential truth. There is no answer to that question as to which book should I begin reading Sri Aurobindo. So I thought I'll put it together, let me
Hmm.
see, and then people can choose. The moment I embarked on that journey, I realized it was a humongous task. It was higher than Mount Everest, deeper than the Pacific Ocean. I immediately called my helpline, which is Devdip Ganguly, sitting right here. And I said, Devdip, let's do it together. This work is beyond my, uh, I don't think I'm up to doing this work entirely on my own. He waded through it. He said, no, even he can't do it. Even the two of us wouldn't be able to finish this work. Then we began to speak to other people, all experts, which Devdip will soon tell you about. And we found altogether 21 authors who are experts, or not really experts in the academic term, but who have lived these works. These are living words of Sri Aurobindo. They are mantric in their structure. They are infused with a deep spirituality. Be it the political works, be it the philosophical works, be it poetry, be it spiritual works. We all got together, and then all of us we approached this project like an offering. And what you have before you is reading Sri Aurobindo to the best of what we could do. Devdeep.
Yeah, I think Gautam, you've summarized it very well.
What we did with the contributors is that we wanted a wide variety of people, and also we did not want to pitch the book only to academics, nor did we want to make it so simple that it becomes simplistic. And we wanted to also demonstrate the diverse kinds of approaches that people have to Sri Aurobindo and the different backgrounds that they come from, which is why the contributors we chose were young and old, men and women, Indians and foreign nationals, and we did that very consciously. In fact, our youngest contributor is in his early to mid 20s. Our oldest
Okay.
contributor is approaching 80. And this is just also to show that, look, Sri Aurobindo is for a very wide and diverse audience as well.
And how did you deal with these interpretations? Because Gautamji was just mentioning that many of the works, it's not just to do with how perceptions are formed or interpretations are formed with reading, right? It is also very timely, A, because what was relevant with or Sri Aurobindo during the time of independence or after independence or now is completely different, from age, demographics, and gender. So in that sense, how have you seen that journey, not just through the book itself, but through the lens of Sri Aurobindo?
So the thing about Sri Aurobindo is like with all, I think, spiritual or profound literature, there are two aspects to it. There's a part of it which relates to the time that he was writing for and the time that he was living in. But since it contains a wisdom that is timeless, there is a much more significant part of his work which speaks to us across ages and across time. And so much of what Sri Aurobindo says, especially when it comes to dealing with the change of consciousness, the practice of his yoga, his commentaries on texts which are themselves thousands of years old, those are relevant across the ages. When it comes to his socio-political writings, of course, they have to be read in context. So when, for example, Sri Aurobindo wrote between 1905 and 1910, he wrote a series of very fiery editorials and articles for for a magazine known as Bande Mataram during the nationalistic movement which he spearheaded. And so those writings, of course, are presented in the context of that time. So I think what we did as far as the contributors were concerned is we gave them a free hand. Between Gautam and I, we have uh, read at least largely the entire complete works of Sri Aurobindo. And we
Okay.
have familiarity with those writings, even if we may not have mastery. And I don't know if there is anyone who has mastery over the entire body, or even of one volume for that matter. But we brought our respective, you can say, readings and engagement with these writings for many years. Gautam, you must be reading Sri Aurobindo for a number of years, right?
Yeah, 20 years every day. And basically from 2000, or a little before that, 1998 or 1999, I began to read Sri Aurobindo. And I read a bit every day, maybe a few days here and there, when I'm traveling or something. Otherwise, mostly every day. Just wanted to add one small thing. Even in Bande Mataram, which is a very context text and very focused in its approach, there are bits that are eternal. For instance, Bhavani Mandir. You can call it a cry for freedom, but you read those lines today, you cannot slouch anymore. You will end up sitting like this because the truths that it contains are just so powerful that you can hear them today. He could have written it 100 years ago. He could have written it 1,000 years ago. He could have written it 1,000 years later. But the truths remain eternal. To that extent, Sri Aurobindo's writings, like Sanatan Dharma itself, are eternal. Having said that, yes, his philosophical writings, his 4 or 5 hard spiritual works are different. But you read his plays, you read his poetry, you read his commentaries. I find, Devdip, that irrespective of the texture or the canvas he chose for writing or speaking those ideas, the essential eternity or essential force, spiritual force that comes is there in all the words. Now, a name here, a country there, an example there are separate matters. Step back, they remain relevant even today.
And as far as the languages are concerned, interpretations also play a huge part, because if you read something that's written in English, that may have a certain sense of interpretation about how you receive it. But if you see the same thing in Bengali, it may be a different thing. And we're talking about the time when Sri Aurobindo saw the Bengal partition and then later on Indian independence as well. So, do you see distinctions in the writings in that sense as to how it's actually evolved for him over the years?
Yeah, but except that there is the only language that I know of Sri Aurobindo is English. Now, I just want to take your point one step forward. When you read any work of Sri Aurobindo, and I read the same chapter, let us take any chapter, you and I will read it differently. And that's not because our interpretations are different. It's because our stage of evolutionary understanding of the mind is different.
Right.
Having said that, if you read that same chapter 3 months later, you will read it differently again. So if we were to write, if all the 21 authors in this book were to write the same chapters today, I assure you the product would be very different. And that is what makes Sri Aurobindo, when I talk about how eternal it is, it's because every word, every aspect of his writing remains there for good. It's there, it's eternal. I don't have a better word than that to express this view. When you talk about other languages, now Devdip knows Bengali and others, maybe he can express those more. But
Yes.
Sri Aurobindo's primary language in his writings was English.
Yeah, so out of the Sharan, out of the 36 volumes that comprise the complete works of Sri Aurobindo, 35 of them are in English. And the only volume where he writes in a different language has his writings in Bengali and Sanskrit. And
Yes.
the
And that
Bengali
caught my
is a,
attention of all things, actually. But I'll add
I
on to that
see,
later.
I see. So one of the volumes is, so what happened is that after Sri Aurobindo was released from Alipur jail in 1908, um, for a brief period, he edited a magazine called Dharmo, which is Dharma basically in Bengali. And that is mostly where he wrote in Bengali. And mind you, he learnt the language after coming back to India, not because he grew up. He At the age of 5, he went to Darjeeling to a convent school, and then at the age of 8, he went to England, and he came back at the age of 21 back to India. So he grew up in a household where Bengali was not permitted to be spoken. So, because his father was a thorough Anglophile and he wanted only English in the house. So, when he came back to India at the age of 21, here is a person who has actually no contact with any. I mean, he did study a little bit of Indian languages in Cambridge, but for all practical purposes, he did not, have any contact with the literature. And so he comes back and he starts learning Sanskrit and Bengali sufficiently so that within 10 years, he's composing writings in Sanskrit and in Bengali. The compositions happen a little later, but he's actually writing poetry in Sanskrit. Not, I mean, apart from the fact that he's reading in Sanskrit and writing commentaries on that in English, but he's also writing in Sanskrit and translating from Sanskrit, and then he writes in Bengali. The Bengali
Right.
is of a very literary kind. It's not it's not a very advanced Bengali, but it's remarkable for the given the background that we have of Sri
Right.
Aurobindo. And other than that, he translated from Tamil and from Latin and Greek and other languages into English.
In fact, what I was reflecting after going through the chapters of your book and generally also reading other essays about Sri Aurobindo, even on Swarajya, is that I think the relatability has been timeless in terms of the personal trajectory and the story that Sri Aurobindo also had throughout his life. Why I say this is because of two reasons. One is that especially the younger generations who are rather disconnected with the freedom struggle and the great people around it, when we identify with somebody, we identify with them in a singularity. Like if you think about Veer Savarkar, you think about aggression, you think about Hindutva, you think about, if you're on the left, you think about mercy petitions. But when it comes to Sri Aurobindo, there is no singularity there. So why is that unique, and how has this actually appealed to the younger generations these days? I would like to hear your perspective on this.
So I don't think Sri Aurobindo can be boxed. So that's the starting.
And please correct me if I'm wrong, obviously.
No, so because your question is so loaded with ideas that I don't know which one to pick up first. So first point is that I don't think Sri Aurobindo can be boxed left or right, poetry or prose, or I don't think he can. He's not that kind of a writer at all. So to say that he was a freedom fighter is accurate. To say that he was a sage is also accurate. To say that he was a poet is accurate. To say that he was an analyst of global affairs is also accurate. So you cannot say that Sri Aurobindo was this. That's the first thing. Second thing is, Sri Aurobindo is not alone in this. From my understanding and readings of Swami Vivekananda, I find he also cannot be boxed into any particular kind of writing or any particular kind of thought. That broadness, I think, is there in both of them. Third, I really wonder, the younger generation, have they even heard of Sri Aurobindo? And I say this with deep reflection because experientially, it was not until I turned 30 that I heard of Sri Aurobindo, even though I would drive on Sri Aurobindo Marg in Delhi every day. I didn't know what it was. It was just a road. I don't know who this person was. I wasn't taught in history. I wasn't taught in current affairs. Sri Aurobindo was cancelled. And to that extent, when I started to discover Sri Aurobindo, and I saw this absolutely, never seen before kind of ideas, never read before, never heard before kind of ideas that he had, which we will come to later, I hope, in the talk, I realized what a vacuum is there in young people in India. They don't know Sri Aurobindo, and such vast, such depth, such wideness, heights of writing, and we don't know anything. I speak for myself. Then I looked around, I found one line here, one para there, etc. Other than that, Sri Aurobindo stands cancelled in India. We hope that with this book, some people will take it as a bridge to read the original works of Sri Aurobindo. And I think India deserves Sri Aurobindo. And this cancel culture has to go away. And we need to embrace our rishis, our thinkers. We can't keep, citing outside thinkers. Not that they are wrong or they are bad, but we need to know who we are. And I think Sri Aurobindo defines that very elegantly.
I think there's nobody left to be cancelled anymore, but that's one matter altogether. But Devdipji, I was hoping that you could take us through the chapterization of the book and what exactly it entails for our readers.
Yeah, so I actually want to take it from what forward what Gautam said and also tie it into what you just asked me to speak on. Thing about Sri Aurobindo is you have to remember that he's a personality who was shaped and who formed himself in many different ways. What I mean is, as I mentioned earlier, his entire education was Occidental, was Western, and he had a solid grounding in Greek and Latin. In the Western education of those days, there was a lot of emphasis on classical thinking, on literature of the great Western writers. Sri Aurobindo knew his Greek philosophy, and he had a solid base of understanding of the Western world and its constructs. Then he comes to India and he plunges. There are descriptions given by people who lived in Baroda who knew Sri Aurobindo saying that crate loads of books used to come every week. He used to order and literally crate loads of books coming every week for him to read and go into. And he, at that point of time, started, as I said, he learned not just the languages, he started reading the Upanishads. He started reading the Mahabharata and the Ramayana and various other texts. And so he had a thorough direct contact, not through translations, the thorough direct contact with the Indian knowledge systems and the wisdom of ancient India. And now you see there's another aspect. After his then of course there is the political Sri Aurobindo, the nationalist period. And then when he comes to Pondicherry, he launches a journal called the Arya, where he presents a new synthesis. His vision is basically a synthesis because he synthesizes many different things, matter and spirit, East and West, the past and the future. And so in the Arya, he looks at this synthesis from different perspectives. So take, for example, the Life Divine, which is his great philosophical work. Even though Sri Aurobindo says, I'm not a philosopher, he writes some of the most extraordinary philosophy in the Life Divine. The synthesis of yoga looks at the yoga systems of ancient India, but how they can combine together, how they complement each other rather than compete with each other, and moving towards some greater perspective. His writings on his commentaries on the Vedas, the Upanishads, and the Gita also form part of the Arya. And then he starts working on poetry, where his own poetry, developing his own poetry, primarily through a book called Savitri, which Gautam knows a lot about, and he'll tell you later. But, but through his poetry, he starts exploring a new form of English literature itself. English literature in India. So this is Indian English literature. It's not, he's not trying to copy, or he's not trying to write literature in terms of how Britain did it.
Yeah.
He's creating a new form of Indian English literature, which sadly is hardly recognized or understood today. So our book presents, why I'm saying all this is because it also ties into your question. Our book presents each of these aspects. It starts with his nationalistic, even earlier writings in Baroda period, then his nationalistic writings. Then it goes into the Arya period. Arya period is where most of his major works come out, some of which I mentioned. I did not mention a couple of other important works in the Arya, which is the human cycle and the ideal of human unity. Those are his writings on social and political philosophy. So here is the same person. So if you for a moment just leave aside the image of Sri Aurobindo as a rishi and a sage, here is a person, a man who in his lifetime, right, is covering this vast body of work and perspectives and cultures in the same pen, so to say. And then later on, you have Sri Aurobindo as the guru, as the master, as the teacher, because he has the ashram in Pondicherry. Disciples are writing to him day-to-day basis on their sadhana, their yoga, and Sri Aurobindo is developing what he calls the integral yoga, which is a new yoga system with a of course founded on the knowledge of the past, but also which looks forward to the future in an extraordinary,
Right.
revolutionary way. Sri Aurobindo was not only a revolutionary in the political sense, he was also a revolutionary in the spiritual sense. And then all of that, right up to his passing in 1950, we have these 36 volumes. So what our book does is it takes up each of these volumes, and we have these contributors, us included, of course, introducing these volumes in 2000 word essays. And we gave certain parameters to our contributors. So we told them that, look, don't make it too long, not too short. We gave them that range. And then we said, you must have not too many quotations, otherwise it gets excessive, but
Right.
sufficient for readers to feel what the actual original text feels like. So through this, hopefully through the book, if they covered the whole book, you get a very solid feel of what Sri Aurobindo is about through his written work.
Thank you so much for summarizing that. It gave a lot of clarity. Um, One more, the part B of my question that I was about to ask the other time is that the relatability factor is again very relevant, even in a personal subjective sense. And I say this because you look at many people during the freedom struggle, they have a somewhat of a similar story to tell in terms of a few elements in their lives. Because of their Anglophile background or the kind of education they would have received, you fast forward 75 years, 100 years, I think largely the story is still the same. Like even for me, while I was reading the book, that's what I understood, that we are all extremely westernized and anglophilic in our way of approach. But at some point in life, you do feel that void, you feel the vacuum, where you need to explore more spirituality, you need to read more, you need to read the Vedas and the Shastras and the Puranas, and that void kind of opens up in your life. And I think this has been the story for Sri Aurobindo as well, and the people who have been influenced by him. Would you agree with that sort of an analysis, Gautamji?
Yeah. When you pick up a book of Sri Aurobindo, it's like a tidal wave. You're at the beach trying to waddle around in some gentle waters, and suddenly there's a tidal wave. You get swept in it. You enter that ocean, and all you find is knowledge, deep knowledge. Every sentence, every paragraph, every idea. And I'm not talking about ideas in the superficial sense that we see today. Every idea is infused with a deep spirituality. There is force behind his words. You sense that. Of course, you need to read Sri Aurobindo with the hermeneutics of respect rather than the hermeneutics of suspicion. Having said that, which is how I would imagine that you would approach the Mahabharata or the Gita or the Upanishads. What I just want to take Devdip's one more point forward. So deep is this Sri Aurobindo's work on Indian spirituality, and I think this is a point that is long forgotten, perhaps not even discussed properly, is that for Sri Aurobindo, the dissolution of consciousness is not the goal. Offering your ego to the higher consciousness, transforming it, and then coming back to divinize matter itself, the body, the cells, is his yoga. It is an integral yoga that, on the one hand, passes through. So, to put it in a different way, the extant or the existing spiritual traditions of India are the path to, or you may even say the starting point of, Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga. Once you attain, salvation is not the goal, for instance. In most Indian traditions, you will read salvation, dissolution, etc. That is not the goal in Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga. That is the starting point. You go there, you reach that higher consciousness, those summits of several layers of consciousnesses, in fact, and then bring them back into matter, into ourselves, into this earth. And that is Sri Aurobindo's yoga. Again, it is not an individual yoga, although the individual is the instrument. It is a collective yoga. There is no ego here. You become a Superman, but if you chase superpowers, that's not his yoga. So these are very complex concepts, and it takes some reading, some time before you begin to sort of get them. Before they get. In fact, what happened with me is these ideas understood me before I understood them. For instance, in Savitri, it's a book that I have been never able to read, and so Devdip was actually pulling my leg a minute ago. It's a book that I have never been able to read more than even a canto is too long, even a quarter of a canto. Sometimes just 5 lines, and I get blissed out. That's the way I read Savitri, although I know Savitri is reading me very clearly. But on the other hand, these other works, for instance, the synthesis of yoga, or life divine is still a little distant from me, but let us say the human cycle. These are ideas that I can understand. But the entire yoga that Sri Aurobindo talks about in a line is taking existing Indian spiritual traditions to the next level. That is his yoga. That is his contribution to Indian spirituality.
How do you think Sri Aurobindo is relevant today? Because India is especially reimagining its identity. We are questioning a lot of the things that we've experienced as a state, as a people, as a society over the last 70 years. Now, there is a radical shift in the way in which the population, the society views a lot of things, right? So in that sense, when we aim to become that civilizational state that we always aspire to be, what among the ideals in the writings do you think holds relevance today?
So I think that Sri Aurobindo is fundamental to that journey. And the reason for that is that when Sri Aurobindo engages with India's past, he does it from a place not of wanting to revert to a past. This is very important. It's a very important point, because there is a great danger when we glorify or we are so enamored of the past that we want to simply live it out again. and that is not a forward movement. And that is where the genius of Sri Aurobindo is that he is able to give us the essence of these past realizations. He is able to take us to the core values that Indian culture and spirituality have evolved over thousands of years. And he is able to present them in a relevant modern context. So for him, the idea of spirituality, in the spirituality of Indian culture, is not simply trying to become, trying to conform to some kind of conventionalism of the past. Because the fact is, even if you want to do that, it's a futile endeavor because the past itself is an evolving past. There's no fixed thing, no such fixed thing as Indian culture unless you go to the essence, which is a fixed, eternal Sanatan reality. And so what Sri Aurobindo does is really take us to that Sanatan essential eternal truth and say, how can we imagine these ideas engaging in the modern world in the modern context, which is why it's very interesting that Sri Aurobindo also wrote in English, right?
Right.
Because it's universally accessible. If you had written in Bengali or in Tamil or in any of the other languages,
Right.
it's limiting. Let us be honest. In India today, we still do not have a language where we can say any of the Indian languages is universally spoken. If at all, it's English to
We are still
whatever
fighting
extent.
over languages, yes.
Yes, exactly. So to whatever extent, at least to us, in terms of breadth of spread, nothing beats English in India as yet. And Sri Aurobindo wrote in English, and yet here is a person who was able to look into the future, and that's where what
I think one of the connecting points is that since the writings are also in English and a large part of our society has unfortunately failed to understand a lot of them, one of the criticisms of the Indian society today is that we've not been able to reform our education system. So, in that sense, it's very interesting to actually read about Sri Aurobindo's views on the education system. So, I was hoping you could introduce us and our audience to that.
Again, Sri Aurobindo's his ideas on education are the starting point is Sanatan Dharma, the individual, Swadharma, Swabhava. And broadly, there are three conceptual differences in the way Sri Aurobindo approaches education and how education approaches us, let us say,
I,
or has been approaching us in the past. First thing is that Sri Aurobindo believes that nothing can be taught. The role of a teacher is to pull out what is already there, and all knowledge is already residing in us. The job of a teacher is to get it out of the student, the child. It's a very unique proposition. So far, what we have been taught is that student knows nothing. They need to sit in a class. A teacher will use a blackboard or
Right.
now some computer and tell the students, hammer into their heads what needs to be done. While actually the students and all, when you look at them as souls, if soul is the starting point, then there is an inversion of the method of teaching. So nothing can be taught. The second principle is that the mind or the swabhava of the student has to be consulted for its own growth. Everybody cannot be an engineer. We keep hearing about this these days, that you can be something, but we want you to be someone. Don't be an engineer, be a doctor. Don't be a doctor, be a data scientist. Don't be a data scientist, be a civil servant, etc., etc. While actually the child would be most happy doing carpentry, for instance. So the mind of the child, it's the job of the teacher to engage with the child, understand the child, and for that, of course, the teacher himself or herself has to be evolved, and then handhold the child into its own growth, rather than to throw information or data or examinations, etc., into the child's head so that he or she conforms to what is broadly defined in a particular syllabus certified by a certain agency as being educated. And the final point is that Sri Aurobindo says the work a child, you need to work from the near to the far, from that which is to that which shall be. And this has very profound implications. For instance, these are just abstract pictures on the board, which you are then taught and hammered into your head. While actually a child of that age, nursery, first, second, should be playing with mud, should be understanding trees, should be engaging with nature, understanding his or her own physical body to have more balance within himself or herself. And gradually, as the child evolves, he begins to learn. The speech comes first, alphabets follow, ideas come, ideas are translated into concepts, knowledge, etc., etc. But unfortunately, today, a child is gauged, and I feel terribly sorry that to see children rattling off A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4 in nursery, in KG, I find that so ridiculous. I mean, I don't think children should be doing that. They should be playing, they should be discovering themselves. So broadly, these are the three principles of his education, and there is a lot more that he has written on, and then followed by the mother, who organized it into 5 kinds of education. Mother is Mirra Alfassa, who is a spiritual collaborator, which is the physical education, the vital education, the mental education, the psychic, and the spiritual education. But I think we'll digress from this talk in this. Devdip, you want to add something? You are the teacher here.
I actually lost connection for a bit, so I'm not sure of the question. But I think if it's about education, you've done a very good job summarizing it.
Okay, let me put you under the lens then. Are you doing your duty as per Sri Aurobindo's principles of education?
Yeah, I mean, so it's something which is I think more and more people around the world are questioning what really education is about, and the more education is concerned with the development of the individual as a soul, as an evolving soul, and not as a functional instrument of society. It ties into Sri Aurobindo's idea of education. It also ties into how education was understood in a truly spiritual sense, even I would say in ancient times.
Sharon, allow me to question once more. Devdip, I'm a little curious, and I think it would be a nice discussion here, because you being a teacher, you knowing what Sri Aurobindo and the mother wanted from education, and you delivering it, what is I'm sure there must be gaps because their standards are way above what we can even imagine. But how do you, are you able to sort of engage with students as a soul, understand the swadharma, swabhava, and accordingly move from the near to the close, or the other principles? Are you able to do that? Is that even possible? Because I mean, he teaches at the Sri Aurobindo International Center of Education. So yeah.
Yeah, so that's a very challenging question, especially because, as you rightly said, it's not a gap, Gautam. It's an enormous gulf between the ideal and the practice. So now, the thing about education also is that it varies so much depending on the level at where you're teaching, and it's every age group has its own beautiful challenges and experiments to do. I've been teaching for the last 18 years or so, undergraduate students, so 18 to 21. And interestingly, it's an age I love teaching that age group because it's an age where the mind is well developed and developing. It's forming. They're able to engage with ideas, and most of the students who come to me are interested in reading something of Sri Aurobindo's writings, either on ancient Indian art, history, culture, or his social and political writings. And definitely, to answer your question, Gautam, every year is different. Every batch is different. At the ashram, college, and school, the batches are very small. We have 8 to 10 students at most in a class, rarely bigger than that, sometimes even less. In some of my classes I have 3 or 4 students, so which means that you have to really engage with the student based on what they are looking and seeking for. So it's really centered around the child. The second thing is that I feel that really it is me who is learning more than teaching, and it's been a gift, a privilege really, in that I have been able to do this, because over time, though some of these writings I have read now maybe 15 or 20 times, the same texts, I have gone with different batches of students, and every time, I'm not kidding you, every time I feel like, oh, I'm learning something which I didn't see last time. It opens up, I understand it better. It's remarkable how you can read and reread writings of Sri Aurobindo over the years and feel every time that there is some new discovery. So it's a continuous adventure and it's fascinating.
Now, we keep saying, like Sharan's question began with, how is education different? How Sri Aurobindo has imagined education and the kind of education that we are seeing, that there is a wide gap within the education that Sri Aurobindo has defined and which you are trying to practice. Again, there is a huge gap. Now, my question is, I'm now wearing my other hat, the policy hat. Now, how do you reconcile such a deep spiritual ideas? I won't even call them philosophical ideas. They're not even a pedagogy. It's a way of life kind of an idea. How do you fuse such powerful ideas at a level of policy?
Yeah, so Gautam, a few days ago, there was somebody who called me from Delhi, somebody who's also, engaged in some way with trying to propose policies and so on. And this person said, Sri Aurobindo has written about a spiritual society and a spiritual age. So can we do a pilot project to create a spiritual society? And it was coming from a place of genuine wish and desire to do something of this nature. And the challenge, of course, Gautam, as you know very well, is that all of this depends on individuals who are moving towards a growing change of consciousness. And so any kind of external imposition, whether it's policy related or any kind of interventional tools that we may use for day-to-day functioning and governance in the field of spiritual change and consciousness has a limited role to play. Having said that, I think that the two things are complementary. So there are certain conditions which one can create, which can encourage people or groups of people from furthering their growth. And so for example, when you provide an atmosphere where a certain freedom is there for people to experiment with different forms of education, you don't force everyone to conform to a set pattern of education. That itself allows interesting things to happen. Some of those experiments may be failures. In fact, most may be failures, but it doesn't matter. The fact that there is a scope and possibility for such experiments to happen means that something can emerge which is beyond what is imposed in a top-down approach. This is just an example. So similarly, you can create conditions for interesting things to happen at a collective level, but we cannot enact through, let's say, an act of parliament, a change of consciousness. That is something which is only possible through individual growth. And in the measure that more and more people forget about reaching the goal, but even more and more people begin to ask themselves fundamental questions and begin to rethink their way of being and living, in that measure, society itself is bound to change. And the tools and policies that are required will evolve from there. We cannot we cannot sort of preview what is going to come, but the more it grows, it will happen naturally. And this ties into what Sharan was also saying in terms of, trying to reconnect with our roots and the idea of the civilizational state. All of these things are all tied together. The more we go back to that source, that essence, we will see spontaneously a shift, whether it's in the way we make films, or in the way that we run media houses, or in the way that we relate to the world in diplomacy, in international affairs. It comes, so it's a within-out movement, and that within has to go deeper and deeper and more profound.
Just as
So
a
once I was in
follow-up to
New
what
York,
Devdip
Yeah.
ji
Once-
actually asked,
sorry,
was telling.
Sharan, let me, I'll just close this part.
Okay, okay.
You need to hear this anecdote. Once I was in New York and we were talking, and I was a journalist then. And I was interviewing one of the top names in education at that point. So I was talking about a school called Mirambika in Delhi, which attempts to follow Sri Aurobindo's principles in a certain way. And I was going on about what a great school this is, so much freedom, the child-centric, etc., etc. So he heard me out, and then he asked me just one question: is it scalable? And that stumped me because I didn't have an answer. Because it's not a mathematical compounding effect that you do 10 teachers, convert those 10 teachers into 10 million teachers across so many schools in so many districts, and voila, you have a supramental beings emerging out of school. No. So to that, it's a very tricky question. So yes, while the aspiration, Devdip, that you were talking about, that they want to do a pilot, I think it is so sweet. It is so naive, naively sweet, and yet the essence of that sweetness, or the essence of that, is a deeper aspiration, where the truth within, but are unable to articulate it within existing institutional structures or policy domains. And I think that's a bridge where people like you, Devdeep, need to work on and craft. How do you make it scalable, for instance?
Yeah, and it's a massive shift which is bound to happen collectively, Gautam. And it's something which has to seep into the culture. Like Sharan was saying earlier, even 75 years after independence, our perspectives are still shaped so much by our colonial past. So, and this has got nothing to do with the fact that we speak in English. That's not the issue. It's not as if now if you start learning in Hindi, then we will all become. Though I mean, the speaking of languages and connecting is a very strong way of connecting to the roots. I don't deny that, but I'm saying it's a way of thinking. It's not so much. It's the content of the textbook doesn't change whether it's in English or in Tamil or in Bengali. So that perspective has to really manifest. And Sharan, there is a text which it's a text which is often cited, and it's a beautiful text. So Sri Aurobindo's birth anniversary is 15th August. It coincides with the independence of India.
Yes.
1947. So for the Independence Day, he was asked to give a message, and he wrote out a beautiful message known as the 15th August 1947 message. And I would advise you and your readers and anyone listening to read that text. It's not very long. In it, he says there are 5 dreams that have informed his life's journey. And those 5 dreams, Sharan, if you look at, you get a picture of who Sri Aurobindo is. Because it starts with dream number 1, the independence of India. Number 2, the resurgence of Asia as a whole. The spirit of Asia, the spiritual knowledge that Asia contains. And that we have a long way to go even in that direction. 3, he says, the unity of the human race. That the whole world comes together on the basis of a spiritual principle. 4, he says, in all this, India has a very important role to play. The spiritual knowledge of India going out to the world is at the foundation of all of these, this vision. And finally, the 5th dream, he says, ties into what Gautam was saying earlier, that there is an evolution of nature which is not complete. There is a growth of consciousness which will take us even beyond what we know of ourselves as human beings. So that tells you just how much Sri Aurobindo embraced past, present, and future.
Coincidentally, whenever I have a question or a follow-up, you perfectly set the premise for it. And this time you were mentioning about how Sri Aurobindo was not just inward looking in terms of a lot of other elements, but even in terms of how relevant Sri Aurobindo's writings and worldviews are today. How would this be applicable in a situation where India is rising as a power? And I'm very interested because I'm a student of geopolitics. So we read about the contours in foreign policy and how a lot of Indian personalities have had an effect on that. Like you look at Veer Savarkar, he's had some sort of an effect. Gandhi has had an effect. So in that sense, how would Sri Aurobindo fit into the contours of our foreign policy?
Gautam is the geopolitics man.
Yes.
So I'm going to let him take this first.
But you are the human cycle man, so we'll come back to you for the philosophical grounding. I think long before independence, when he wrote Bhavani Mandir, which I talked about earlier in the program, there is a line there: strength, more strength, and still more strength. And I think that strength of India is essential. He's praying that we need to set a temple in the name of Bhavani. Who is Bhavani? Bhavani is strength within. So I think that first aspect of strength, which also, by the way, resonates with Vivekananda's ideas of strength, a strong nation, is the first premise. And we are seeing the first expression of that strength coming through before our eyes. Second, we may be the world's 5th largest economy, but we remain a poor country with a per capita income of 2,000. I think this needs to go. We need to touch 10,000 and 20,000 before the first half of this century. And although within this decade, we will be the world's 3rd largest economy. It is only after the stomachs are full, the comforts are taken care of, that we can look outward. That is the general principle. Having said that, India has been an important global player right from 1947. Even though we are not part of the Security Council, our voice matters. Even though we were an extremely poor country, our voice mattered. We were an inward-looking nation, even then our voice mattered, and now we are going out with our voice. And I think Jaishankarji is one of the most fantastic foreign ministers that we've had, most articulate. But perhaps he's standing on the shoulders of the previous finance ministers. The growth that came, the strength that has happened, and taking it forward. Maybe he's accelerating the bit and stepping on the pedal. You are going to see India as a far more important geopolitical player in the years ahead than it has been in the years behind. In fact, this year alone, beginning October, India will have the presidency of the Group of 20, G20. And you're going to see a lot of discussions, a lot of engagements, a lot of ideas where India would be the central point around which a new future could be built. The fact that we could have our own interest in mind, it comes as a surprise to the West. They accuse India of buying oil from Russia while they are buying more oil, as again Jaishankar said. Europe buys more oil in an afternoon than India does in a month. These kind of very articulate, precise, India-centric, keeping Indian interest in mind statements are coming. These statements are going to be followed through. We will have our enemies in the form of Pakistan and China on our borders. They are not going to go away. But maybe they will transform. We don't know. Right. But the fact is that as a geopolitics, at India at 75, all eyes are on India. Now, the narrative writers are one step behind. When I look at India from the prism of G to G, that is government to government engagements, every diplomat in this city that I have met wants a free trade FTA agreement with India. Right. When I look at it from the point of C to C, which is company to company, B2B, business to business, I see so much interest in coming. Apple is setting up, it's one of the largest plants for iPhone 14. Many others are coming. High technology plus low technology, everybody is coming to India. So B2B is also happening. C to C, at the level of citizen, you are seeing far more citizens coming in and out, Indians going out to study, foreigners coming out to work, to get an India stamp, a 3-year stamp of India on their resumes, which helps them negotiate their own careers much better in their home countries. The only missing space is the narrative space, N to N or M to M, media to media, which has become completely irrelevant. They are behind times. Right. In all this, what I see, if you want to see where Sri Aurobindo is, he has analyzed this long back, and which I explored in my previous book called India 2030, The Rise of a Rajasic Nation. And I think this Rajas is now rising. Some people are afraid that we don't use the word Rajas, etc. But there is no going back. This is a Rajasic age. Look at our cinema, look at our businesses, look at our military, look at our engagements with the world, look at our engagements within, look at the politics, look at the crime, look at any part of India. You are seeing this Rajasic surge coming. Sri Aurobindo had seen it earlier. He didn't say it was the best thing, by the way. But the fact is that there has been no Sattvic nation so far. Will India be that Sattvic nation over the next 50 years, over the next 100 years? We don't know. But we will have to pass through this Rajasic state.
Right.
We will have to stand up for our own values, our own civilization, our own strength to come back to Bhavani Mandir before we can become a Sattvic nation. So maybe I exceeded my brief, but
No. It's actually perfect. And in fact, I was going to say
Devdip will
that.
temper it down in philosophical undertones. Devdip, please
Not at
talk
all.
about
I will take that. No, when it comes to philosophy, I love listening to people more. Otherwise, generally, in a lot of the other conversations, you would see me interrupt a bit more and then ask a few more questions here, which is why I'm a little laid back and I'm letting you do all the work. It's actually perfect once again because it's mentally I'm such an unorganized person, right? Because I do 1,000 readings and then I come with all unorganized thoughts and I keep shooting all the questions. Here you spoke about how India perhaps has achieved a metric of success on different fronts, and on different fronts we are attempting to do better than we were doing before. But I think one place where India, a land of storytellers, has failed is in the articulation of its views. And when you speak about Dr. Jaishankar, you see a sense of hope because he's able to articulate so many of our feelings and our views so ably. I think even Sri Aurobindo had written about this, about how India had somehow failed to articulate a lot of the stories and the views that we have as a nation and as a society. So that's really relevant even now if you look at it. But him as a personality, as a person, and through his writings, he's been able to influence so many people, even from the West. And these are not just intellectuals and writers, but even the massy crowd who consumes Sri Aurobindo for their own good. Devdip ji, do you want to add on to that? Especially people like Paul Brunton, who I love reading, right? I mean, you see those tenets of Sri Aurobindo through their writings as well.
Yeah, I mean, there is something absolutely universal about Sri Aurobindo and his message. And even when he spoke about India and the rise of India, it was always, eventually, when you see his later writings, it was always in the context of the role that India has to play for itself and for the world. He used to always say, and even the mother, his spiritual collaborator, reiterated many times, that India's rise is not for herself. It is necessary for the good of the world. It is necessary because there is a knowledge that India has contained and held on to for thousands of years, which is for humanity as a whole. And this is an idea which even our ancient seers knew and expressed, right? When they spoke about the good of the whole world, it was not in a very, what shall I say, in a sort of cliched way. So the rise of India as a political, military, economic nation is definitely the story of this decade, of perhaps even this century. But it is tied into the reason why India is rising. Because if it is just to rise like any other nation, which has, over time, so many nations have risen, have become powerful countries. They have become militarily, economically mighty. They have had their moment in the sun and then they fade away. That is not India's story. India rises, and it must rise. As Gautam said, the stomachs have to be filled. But then there is something which is profoundly for the world and for humanity as a whole, which is necessary for the next future, you can say, growth and stage of humanity. And I think that is something that Sri Aurobindo reiterates. And the beauty of Sri Aurobindo is a spiritual pragmatism. He sees the reality of things as they are. His spirituality is not lost in the clouds. It is not even though the ideal that he sets is the highest possible. He sees further than anyone else has seen, and yet he is fully cognizant, aware of the reality as we live it today. So he's not disconnected from the world and from human nature. In fact, there are some very interesting letters that he exchanged with disciples. One of the disciples telling Sri Aurobindo that, oh, for you it's very easy to talk about the change of human nature and consciousness. You're a special person. You're a different being altogether. So, I mean, but for us, we poor human beings, you don't understand how much we have to struggle. And Sri Aurobindo comes down humorously, of course, but very hard on this person, saying that you have no idea how much I have had to go through, how much we have had to work on ourselves to reach where we are. Which this is just to indicate that he was fully aware of the tremendous challenges at the individual and collective level that Gautam touched upon. And at the same time, he kept pointing us to a future, saying, remember that you're rising for a profounder reason. And that is very important in Sri Aurobindo's vision.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I really, really enjoyed this conversation. But before we say goodbye, I would like your parting thoughts, any conclusion, and any message that you may have for our viewers.
Yeah, the only message is that in case you are not familiar with Sri Aurobindo, our book, Reading Sri Aurobindo, will make you familiar. Do buy, do read, do gift. We have nothing to gain from this financially. We see our book as a bridge. If any one of you, after reading a book, is able to negotiate Sri Aurobindo's original writings, that would be our greatest, that's all that we would like. So many people say it's very difficult to read Sri Aurobindo. Maybe they are right, maybe not, because different books come at different times. Our book has attempted to introduce Sri Aurobindo, make you familiar with the grammar of his language. Not grammar as in English grammar, but his vocabulary, his ideas. Yeah. Once you have this, please go to the original works. Please read them. Write to us. Engage with Sri Aurobindo, and that's it. Thank you. It's been very nice being on this podcast. We enjoyed ourselves very much. Thank you, Sharan.
Thank you so much, Gautam ji.
Yeah,
Devdip
I
ji.
just want to mirror what Gautam said. And 75 years of India's independence, 150 years of Sri Aurobindo's birth. The time has come for us to engage with his writings and his thoughts. And it is necessary for India, for the world, that we owe it to ourselves to really make an effort to understand, practice, and live out the vast truths and vision that this sage, this modern sage, had, and this legacy that he has left with us.
Thank you so much for joining me today. It was really nice talking to you. And we'll put a link in the description below of where they can purchase the book. And viewers, please do let us know what you thought about this particular conversation. Until next time, this is your host, Sharan, signing off.